Hello and welcome to the custom scoring and formulas webinar. I'll see there are already a few people that have joined our webinar. We'll wait a few more minutes for other people to arrive. All right, so I think most people are already in, so I assume we can start. Hi to all people from all over the world. That's always nice to see. I'll first formally introduce myself. I'm, as you can see on the screen, I'm Seppe. I'm the customer support team lead of Pointerpro. As a result, I'm an unofficial product expert because I've been with Pointerpro for several years. Hence, I'm doing this webinar to give you some insights on custom scoring and when you would use formulas and how to set them up. If you take a look at what we have planned for today, we'll briefly touch on question logic, because it's also an important part, and then combination of custom scoring and formulas. We'll also touch on predefined filters, just to give you an idea of what is possible. And then we'll discuss some typical use cases, and then afterwards we have our time for Q&A reserved. So again, if you have any questions or specific use cases you would like to discuss, don't hesitate to ask them in the questions tab, bottom right. Then we'll get started. All right. So first and foremost, we'll zoom in on question logic. First part of this webinar, we have pasted here an overview from the help guides that we have. Basically, this allows you to control the flow of your questionnaire and assessments to make it dynamic and user-specific. Now, what this means is that you can show questions, hide questions, skip questions, and then also interact with making them mandatory, etc. If you take a look in the editor as to what this means, this can be found in the questionnaire tab. So second tab from the left on the nav bar. And then the third one from the left in the questionnaire editor itself. So you can see questions, design, extra options. Typically, you would have to scroll down a bit to find the question logic tab, which is where all your logic rules live. On the right-hand side, you can see that you have the list of all the question logic rules that you currently have. And then in the middle is where the magic happens, is where we set the if-then statement. So you can see that there are two blocks, one for if, one for then. What I typically think of as a, maybe as an example is to have this formulate or set up as if something is true, then something else should happen. So if you take a look at the if statement, whenever this thing is true, then the specific clausule will happen. And we have a few different ways to make that happen. In regards to the if statement, we have a few options, mostly related to answers on questions on intro fields, but also on custom score, which can be on questionnaire level, question block level, but also on individual question level. This can also be linked to contexts and languages. And as a exception, we also can set this up related to formulas so that you can reference other formulas in your question logic. But this requires a custom permission that we freely give. So if you are interested in taking a look at this option, don't hesitate to send us a message and then we'll enable it for you. Then those are the if statements. If you take a look at the then, so what this could mean for your questionnaire, this basically, or this typically means that we skip questions, that we hide questions. You can also skip to the end entirely, skipping the rest of your questionnaire. You can hide specific answers. You can show answers to interact with those two. You can make it mandatory, the specific question that you are on, and you can also add to formula, which will be important as we'll touch upon later. We have a few typical use cases to discuss here in regards to question logic. Now, two great cases that our team has identified is in regards to skipping questions based on the answer of your respondents. Now, this is something you would typically find in a risk assessment or 360, where you can say you have an intro field with subject name. If the name is empty, you would hide, for example, an extra information questions or demographical questions, as they are not comfortable sharing their individual or personal data. Also, something you could do with 360s and question logic is, for example, if your rated role or your respondent is from the type self, you would display certain questions. If your respondent is from the type manager, you would display another set of questions. It's also something you would typically do. In regards to the other example on the right-hand side of the screen, this is using add to formula. So basically you allot a score and add it to a formula that you already have specified based on the certain if clausule. So answer on a response typically, but could also be question block score or question score of the questionnaire. This is something typically found in skill assessments and personality assessments. Typically also related to the subscores or personality scores. So imagine that you have a DISC type personality assessment where you have DISC. If I would answer option 1 on question 1, which would then relates to, let's say, personality I could set it up with question logic in the sense that if answer A on question 1 is equal to A, add 1 to formula I. So that at the end of the questionnaire, you can tally those results together and see the results for each of your personality statements or the subscores. A few more typical cases, we'll go over them in a bit higher level. So you could display open-ended questions as a comment so that you have a step form. So if somebody selects none or not applicable or an other option, you could have another comment field show up on the same slide. This is also typically combined with multiple choice questions. The way this works is that you would use is not equal to as opposed to is equal to on single choice questions, because you want to avoid that people only select one option and that your logic is then not true, because if something is equal to A and B, it's of course not equal to A. But if you can say it's not equal to B and then hide a certain question or hide a certain answer, that's how you typically would do that. You can have in-survey feedback with hidden questions or with hiding questions. Example there is that we could, for example, have the capital of France as a question, where the next question would be a text-only question with true, this is Paris, or false, the capital of France is Paris. So based on the answer that was selected, like London and Paris, you could show the correct or the wrong answer, the correct or the wrong result. You could also hide questions based on the intro screen contact info. We already briefly touched upon this in regards to statements or rater roles, but could also be companies, organizations, could also be emails, could also be whatever sub categories or divisions that you set up for your contacts and respondents. And then we have add to formula, which can be a Boolean formula, for example, or personality score. Boolean formula, a good example of that. A Boolean is a value between 0 and 1, either 0 or 1. So it's like binary, either one or the other. One way you could use this is to identify if a response was completed. So if the answer on the last question is equal to anything, you add 1 to the formula, and then you can see formula completed is equal to 1, or formula completed is equal to 0. Hence, you could use this in your question logic, but also in your PDF and also in your email flow. Now that we're talking about formulas, that's a nice bridge onto the next part. So again, we have an overview from our help guide here. Formulas basically allow you to do custom calculations within Pointerpro. This can range from average scores, but also summary, subtractions, multiplications, divisions, etc. All the typical mathematical equations you would normally use. but also we have some predefined ones in regards to averages, min, maximum scores, etc. Again, this is where you can find it. So formulas are under the extra options tab, so third tab from the left, in the questionnaire editor, also under the custom scoring option. On the right-hand side, you can see a list of all the formulas you currently have activated and created for your questionnaire. In the middle, again, is the magical stuff where you define title. Variable is defined for you, so that's not something you can interact with, but something you can reference throughout your questionnaire, outcomes, and PDF. This is typically also available in the variable dropdown. And then you have the formula field, which is where you will specify or define your formula. A bit of clarification on how and what you can use with formulas. So formulas allow for numerical values only. So basically anything text related should not be done with formulas, in the sense that if you want to do a calculation and there is text in there, the calculation breaks. So you want to make sure that you only use numerical values. In regards to nested formulas, there's also a reminder or a best practice I want to share with you, in the sense that if you want to use a formula inside another formula, then you would have to make sure that the nested formula, so the formula that you reference inside the already existing formula, that the other formula is calculated first, so in chronological order. If in the event that you switch them around, so that you have first your formula referencing a different formula that is then calculated later, this could result in calculation issues where that formula is not calculated yet, resulting in a 0. So the chronological order is their best practice. In regards to what kind of values you can use, you can use static, hard-coded values, of course, which is typically used for benchmarks. You could say your average score on this questionnaire is 7.5 out of 10. And then over time, once you have enough respondents in, you could make it dynamic and then change that variable or that result with a variable calculation. In regards to dynamic content, this is typically done via either our variables, either external fields, which allow you to get data from external data sources, or with Boolean formulas that we define with custom score or with question logic. Our available variables are in the list below. I briefly wanted to touch upon them, but we won't go into detail. But if you have a question, feel free to add it to the questions down here below. So the variables that we typically have available are questions with all the individual ones. We have formulas that you can reference. You can reference question blocks. You can reference custom score and quiz score as opposite of each other. And then you can also use response count in our formulas. Now, in regards to formula testing, also an important part of our formula building, I want to stress that this is or should be used as a semantic check only. So this basically allows you to test if the formula that you have inputted makes sense. So if there's no mathematical errors, if the equation checks out, if there's no obvious mistakes. Now, this is always based on your last response. So in no sense, this is a real-time calculation. So this should only be used as a reference, whereas your actual result will be found in the results dashboard, which is what I would use to make sure and to reference if your calculation comes through correctly. Another important reminder here is that this is only for individual results, or should only be used to calculate and reference individual results. Whereas for group results or averages, you should reference them from the results dashboard because the test actually has a different calculation behind it than our response submission. So I would recommend you to test your average formulas in that sense. All right. Now, if you zoom in on formula filters, this is an additional feature that you can use to define your population groups for your formula calculations. So this should always include, or include multiple responses, which is the top one button you can see in the screenshot. This basically allows you to reference multiple survey respondents. Then you also want to make sure that you use an average variable. If you use F1 result, this will, in all cases, still result in an individual calculation, as there's no requirement for the software to magically translate into an average formula. So if you want to use average calculations, you want to make sure that you use average variables as well. And then there's also a difference between filtering on formula level and filtering on PDF level that I wanted to specify. Now, filtering on PDF level basically allows you to filter and calculate your results on the exact moment when a PDF is generated. This is typically something you would use if you have, for example, a team of 10 people collecting their responses, and then at the end, say 2 weeks later, you would generate a report. At that point, you would calculate those formulas so that the total population can be referenced as a benchmark for all, as opposed to the first respondent only having one response. Then the other case is where you would do on-formula filtering, is basically when you want to break out of your population, and where you say, specifically in regards to our aggregate reports feature, where you specify your population group before you download the report, using a formula filter or a filter set inside your formula allows you to break out of that restriction and also or still reference the total population, even though your PDF download was specified to only include people from company ABC, for example, but then you could also compare results from company ABC's with your total population. A few other typical cases that make sense for formulas to be used is when you want to rank your results, when you want to do a percentile calculation and score conversion. So even if it's not converted to 100, it can be converted to 25 or 162, for example. You want to typically do this with formulas. Also subscore calculation for non-chronological questions. So imagine that you want to reference the result for question 1, 5, 7, and 10. This cannot typically be done with a question block. So this is where you would use a formula calculation. If you want to use averages, benchmarks, and percentiles, that's a good case for formulas to be used. And if you want to do difference and gap calculation, so one respondent versus a population, or one respondent versus, for example, their 180 manager. All right, now the next part is in regards to predefined filters. We already briefly touched upon it when we referenced the in-formula variable filters and the in-PDF filters. Predefined filters basically allow you to pre-configure your formula filters, which can then be used inside your PDF report to make or scale your formulas in a dynamic way. So this is a clever trick you can use to avoid making 1,000 different formulas where it should only have been 10 or 100, for example. Typical filters are demographics, teams, companies, organizations, dates, etc. Those fields you would typically include. So this is something you can find in our aggregate reports add-on. So this basically allows you to set your filters in advance and then reference them in the report. You can find them in the same block as formulas, so under custom scoring, in the extra options on questionnaire builder. And if you take a look at what this looks like, so we have in the middle, we have our name, we have our handle. Basically, this is your shorthand to be included in your variable inside your PDF. And then we have a description, which is up to your reference to use. And then we have the filter itself. So for example, you could say if question answer team is equal to sales, I want to specifically average the result for everybody in the sales team, but also for the finance team, but also for the operations team, etc. So this can also be done in a 360 environment where you want to compare all the cells versus all the managers, or versus all peers, or versus all others. So this is something you would typically do with predefined filters. Then, once you have set up your predefined filter, you would reference your formula itself. So imagine that we want to do communication skills, which is then questions 2, 3, and 4 divided by 3 to get us an average per question. And inside your PDF, you would then go to formulas and find the predefined formula or the pre-filtered formula, which then typically mentions the filter name itself. So you can see here formula average result for marketing predefined filter. You can also see down below that there's a sales and there should be an operations predefined filter as well, as we had defined those. You add those to your PDF report, and then on the report calculation or generation, those variables will then be calculated holding the population into account which you have specified with your filter. A few other cases that we might want to touch upon. So this can typically be used by companies and teams. So you define different teams, you define different companies across your total population. You can also filter by demographics. So for example, male, female, other, but you could also filter by age, you could filter by eye color, etc. Or you could filter by date. So based on the response that was collected or when the response was collected. All right, that's it for short introduction, best practices, and the content of the webinar itself. Now, if you take a look at the questions, I can see that Miran has asked the question, so can group averages be calculated and seen on the report dashboard as well? If you would calculate this as a formula inside your questionnaire and not just as a formula handle inside the PDF, this is definitely something you can reference. So for example, you would have all your formulas from an individual standpoint be calculated first, and then you could have all your average formulas be calculated below those, where you can reference them in your results dashboard as well, but also in your export. So as long as the individual or the formula itself exists inside your questionnaire as an individual formula, that should be possible. Another question from Jason. When do I have to use math calculations? This is typically something you would use when our default functionality does not allow you to do what you want, as in the sense that it's not an average, it's not a percentile, it's not a minimum or a maximum, but it's, for example, a square root, or it's, for example, an exponential calculation. It can be a rounded down number, it can be a rounded up number. It's also a typical case for the math object to be used. If you're familiar with the math JavaScript object, there's a whole lot of stuff you can do with it, and most of it should be possible within our software. And the typical case is when you want to try something that is not possible by default, I would recommend to take a look at the math object. On the help guide, we do have a list which then redirects you to the MDN documentation. So if you want a full list of what can be done with math, do take a look there. All right, I believe that's it in regards to questions we have received. I'll give you a few. We have a question from Samantha, as in where to find that. Now, this is something you would find on the formulas help guide under the advanced calculations, is where I would look. But you can also look for the MDN documentation math object. That should also get you started. It's fun to play with, so I would definitely recommend it to take a look. All right, I believe that were the questions we had today. I hope it was insightful, that you learned something today. If not, you can always ask the questions retroactively, and then we can follow up in the next webinar. So thanks for joining. Have a very nice rest of your day, and I will see each other. Bye-bye.